Greetings, my dear friend, and how are you today? I'm thinking sometimes I need to talk to myself rather than the world. And today is one of those days. I'm feeling a little vulnerable. Is that the word? I've been trying to think. Being in touch with your feelings is very important for spiritual growth. You want to know where you are along the path of achieving a higher state, choosing happiness over fear or sadness. And when that disquieting feeling comes upon us, as we all have, because we're all humans, we are not robots, we are not AI vehicles, we have feelings. And feelings are like signposts of our spiritual abilities to tell us we need to make an adjustment if we feel out of sorts, or to celebrate that we have achieved some milestones in our lives, like feeling happy instead of sad, or feeling useful instead of not useful, and all those other things. So today, that word vulnerable is the word that I'm thinking about when I'm trying to describe the feelings I have. I'm not depressed. I'm not feeling out of connection with the cosmic force of the universe, which I feel is very important for me to do my work as an artist and writer and spirit activist. I'm just feeling a little like out of it in the human realm. And I must tell you why. Okay, I went to an event with my dear husband and co-host. You must all be wondering, where is Carter? Well, he's coming back as soon as he achieves his goals. Then that's why he's taking this sabbatical. His goals of being more involved with other things right now. So we went to celebrate his involvement with something very important in our community, which was the resurrection of a pre-colonial fort that was built in honor of freed Black people. I was going to say Negroes, but that's an old-fashioned word, isn't it? And it's called Fort Mose. If anybody wants to find out about it, you can Google it. But Fort Mose basically was an opportunity for slaves who could find their way to this location, which is St. Augustine in Florida, wherever they came from. If they were on a plantation as a slave in Virginia, or which at that time might not have even been a state. But we're talking about the early days when the indigenous people were on the outskirts of town, and the beginnings of the European settlements, which St. Augustine happens to be one of the very first in this new world called America. And there were fights over who was going to be the superpower. Was it going to be the French or the Spanish or even the Dutch and the Portuguese? And so at the time we're speaking of, Fort Mose was built by the Spanish. And that was, 16th century, something like 1532. Something like that in the early days of the conquest of this beautiful land, whose true inhabitants and truly the owners of this land are the Native Americans, the first people. And, we want to give them all the credit in the world that they were sharing their land with the colonists. But the colonists also brought shiploads of the blacks, the Africans. We all know the story there. So Carter has been very involved since the very start of people wanting to honor Fort Mose. And it was a place the Spanish built outside of town, not in their little village, but they wanted to encourage more citizens to come to St. Augustine. So they offered freedom to any Black person who could make their way through the swamps and the woods and the chases by their owners, and, they were considered chattel. Terrible times. But those who made it were given freedom, as long as there's always got to be this quid pro quo. in our human interaction, they were given freedom if they became Catholic. Okay, so the Spanish, of course, were all Catholic at that time. And the African people who did make it to Fort Mose were so desperate, they didn't care because they honored their Africanness in private. But a lot of them did become Catholic just so they could have freedom. So Fort Mose, it only lasted, I don't even think it lasted a whole generation before it was destroyed or burned. And, just one of those things about playing poker with people's lives, and people were dispersed. But at least for a short time, for 20 or 30 years, the Black people who made it to Fort Mose were given refuge from the storm of being slaves. And they had a wonderful little community there. A lot of them fled to Cuba when their freedom was once again disrupted. And they just jumped out of this country and bailed and went to Cuba. So Carter has been very involved, and Carter is a white guy, but he's got a voice that sounds like a Black guy. Some people might think he might be. He's been called Lord by his Black friends, and we have an ease and a comfortability with many Black people, not just Americans, but I used to live in the West Indies and a Black nation. I was one of very few white people who lived in Dominica in the 70s. So Carter and I went to celebrate the opening of the new replica that has now been built, funded by the state of Florida and other partners, like even the football team, the Jaguars, and other historical-minded groups, legal people, business people, civic working people, and mostly the historical societies and park services of Florida. So we now have in this beautiful town of St. Augustine the replica of Fort Mose. And I'm very happy about it, and I've been very, much supporting however I can. But when I went to the opening ceremonies with Carter, I didn't know anybody. It was so odd to be in a room full of 100 people. And okay, there were 2 people that I knew. I went over and greeted them, and I introduced myself to several other people. But for the most part, all the people there were from their little cliques, tribes, organizations, and I was not a part of those organizations. So I was very much like the outsider, or I felt like the outsider, even though I had supported this endeavor and have been instrumental in doing whatever I can, even helping Carter make a film about it. And I was like a production assistant and, many efforts. So why did I feel like an outsider? And I've been examining that. And why did I feel so not safe and not part of? I brought up a lot of old feelings that I used to have when I was younger, mostly as a kid and a teenager. And those feelings of not belonging were a big part of my life. We moved around a lot, and there was, never an opportunity to really dig in and be a part of a town or a passing group of people. I was always the new kid in town. And as many of you know who listen to Z Lord podcast, I am a recovering addict and alcoholic for 40 years. But those feelings of being outside and not safe and vulnerable, those are deep childhood things that I would like to think have been healed and resolved and no longer a part of my makeup. But yesterday at that event, they came up, and I was quite amazed, actually, to tell you the truth. Here I am offering the world my ideas and my creative connections to these thoughts and these elevations of a philosophy that I've worked on all my life with my art and my writing and my activism. But yet, at that time, in that space, in that group of people, I felt, who am I? How do I fit in here? What is my role? And my answer was, I was nothing. I had no role. I had just the honor of being the partner of my dear beloved Carter Lord, who was very involved and knew everybody and was very active in all sorts of ways of getting funding and advertising and, promoting and encouraging and all that stuff. He's very involved with this endeavor. But I had to tell myself, wow, all I did was support Carter's endeavor, which is a big deal, actually, when you're talking about being mated to somebody whose endeavors are of a different ilk than yours. You want to support, right? That's what a spiritual relationship is all about. You support them and they support you, whether it's a friendship or a 34-year marriage like ours. So that feeling of vulnerability, of not being part of not knowing my place was valued or even recognized, was pretty strong. And I had to ask myself, as I thought, okay, I really would like to offer a podcast. It's a little past the regular time that I do it. And maybe there are people who, the other day somebody said, I listen to podcasts, and when they're not put out exactly when I know they're coming out, I get discouraged and I don't come back. Well, anybody who listens to Z Lord knows that there's no regular schedule here. We just offer what we can, when we can, and as best we can. And that's the life of the artist. Carter and I are both dedicated to our creative pursuits, number one. So I thought, well, who wants to hear about vulnerability and not feeling useful and not knowing what my role is? Maybe that's too personal. I had a little talk with myself this morning, and I thought, no, maybe there's a lot of people who feel that way, even if they are actively involved in their careers or raising their kids or discovering the cure for cancer or whatever, being a fireman, being a person who feels like they fit in. Maybe some people go through these times where they lose their connection with their human tribe. So my connection is very strong and very comfortable with the sacred, with the energy that is the most important in my life, which is to feel okay in my skin as a divine entity that is having this human experience. Let me be very clear about that. I feel very comfortable with knowing that the sacred energy within me is alive, and I'm nurturing it, and I'm using it to the best of my ability, however I can. Sometimes it's this way, sometimes it's that way, but always it's creative and it's honored and it's recognized, that connection with the divine force of my humanness. What I have trouble with is, as a human person, as a woman, as an artist, or as a member of society, just my humanness, take away, like, okay, if I had no belief whatsoever that there was this sacred energy in life, and I'm still a person, well, I would want to be successful, I would want to be popular, I would want to be feeling like there are people who like me and understand where I'm coming from and maybe even look at me and say, hey, you're a nice person. But That's the stuff I'm talking about that was so obviously lacking in my interactions at the event last night. And I relate to my Black brothers and sisters, I must say, more than I do the white people who were there, because I have lived in a Black island country, Dominica, for many years, while I was doing business in the West Indies, inter-island shipping. I know what it's like to be one of minority, well, almost like a freak, not just a minority. There were so few white people in the 70s that, and it also was, there was a dangerous element involved. There was some unrest going on with a faction of the Black young people who had taken to the hills. They were called the Dreads. They wanted to live without any influence of society or materiality. They wanted to live with grass skirts and smoke ganja, and they committed some dangerous acts against white retirees who were living not integrated in the Black community, but more or less wanting to be waited on, wanting to be served, wanting to flaunt their wealth. And so there was an element of danger there too. So I have this comfortability with Black people because I lived in this dangerous situation for most white people, but I never felt in danger. I felt I was one of every person, whether they were Black or white, or, we had an indigenous population there too. We had the Carib Indians, and the people that I feel the most alienated from are white people, the people who have a history of not understanding people of color and people of a lesser station in life who kind of flaunt their power, their abilities, their importance. So at the event last night, I reached out to at least 3 or 4 people of color whom I had never met, just introduced myself because there was an opening there, because they responded with smiles and lights in their eyes. They were interested. And when I glanced at several white people who I did not know, they just looked away. They did not have the smile, the spark in their eyes. And so I really did not very successfully reach out to my fellow white people. It's interesting that I'm talking about this. It's so important for me to understand my feelings, because I know now, as a sober spiritual person dedicated to spreading the light and the energy of this divine experience that we have in our humanness, it's really important for me to understand the role that feelings take. And that feeling of being vulnerable that I had last night, and I continued to have it when I woke this morning, it's important for me to analyze and to scrutinize where that feeling came from. And so by talking in a podcast with you, it's better than just thinking about it. I mean, it's always better to verbalize ideas, whether you're talking to another person in conversation or like this. It's a monologue, of course. There's no other person here. But I could also write it. I could create an essay, but that's different. Talking is more spontaneous. Talking is melodic. Talking is like singing a poem. And so truth comes out when we want it to, by speaking or having that vibration of the voice. And for people who lose their ability to speak, or for whatever reason they have cancer of the larynx or throat or whatever, I'm not saying that they are lacking this ability. They can do other things. They can write, and they can create a picture, for instance, or you know how little kids are always encouraged to draw their feelings. Like you lose a pet and you're just heartbroken. Children need to get their feelings out. And I know this from having raised Carter's kids. They were very small when I became their angel mom. And yes, we lost pets. And yes, there was sadness because there was a bad divorce in their life. And they always were encouraged, not just by family psychiatrists, but me, who knows how powerful it is to express feelings with either words or drawing or dance or music or some kind of expression of creativity. So when there was a pet lost, we didn't just go out and get another pet. That's putting a Band-Aid on something. But to really get in touch with that feeling of loss, a child responds so well by, let's do a drawing of how much we love Bruno, even though he's gone, or Punky who disappeared, or some other pet that all of a sudden is no longer with us for whatever reason. A parakeet flying out the window, a dog I had who followed somebody to the subway and just disappeared. So our feelings need to be addressed. And that's why I'm talking about this feeling of vulnerability. I feel better just having shared it with you. And, oh, well, maybe you can relate. Maybe it's not the feeling of vulnerability that you can relate, but whatever feeling, like even elation or curiosity, or yes, the dark ones, the fear, the depression, whatever feelings come to you, it's very, very important to explore them because they are the signpost of our spiritual development. We don't just like plod along on the journey of life. We recognize these important moments, like when we're a kid and we graduate from one grade to the next, and then we graduate from high school and we graduate, or we get a job, or we get married, our first child. You know, all these things are celebrations. But also we need, as human beings, we need to celebrate and really have a relationship with our feelings, each one of us individually. Why? Because they help us understand our growth. And if there's one thing about life, it's always about change. It's always, always growing, always expanding, always elevating, like the upward spiral of evolution. Some people may not feel that way. You know, they may think, oh, there's some terrible things going on, but that's part of the evolution. Evolution is not just this straight line from birth to death. You have everything in between. And for some of us, it's many, many decades of in-betweenness. For some, it's just a fleeting moment. I have a brother who was stillborn, and I've often thought of his existence. It was important, even though he came out of my mother's womb with no life. His existence has affected mine because I've thought about him a lot, and, you know, he was part of my story. And maybe that was his role in life, to come in for a fleeting second and leave immediately. But it was just as impactful as if he had lived 6 or 7 decades in my life, what it has done to make me think certain things and to feel part of the story of our humanness. So I just want to encourage you, as I say, have a beautiful day, to just ask yourself, what are you feeling right now? And it's okay to feel weird, and then you can say, oh, well, why do I feel weird? Or it's okay to say, well, I just feel great. I don't know. It's no big deal. But what's not okay is to just feel numb. Numb is not good. And it's okay to feel even depressed or sad or confused. And it's okay to feel the opposite, happy and content and accepting of all. But what's really not okay is to just say, I don't know. I just don't know. I don't care. That's not cool. And if you're that kind of person, I just encourage you to explore a little more about your feelings, because they're very important. And I know from having numbed out my feelings for quite a while, using drugs, alcohol, acting out with, weird behavior, all those things take you out of your feelings, usually because you feel weird or awkward or, not happy. People who use substances or weird behavior to not look at their feelings. Well, that's not something that you want to do if you want to elevate your thinking and join the incredible movement in humanity right now, which is so dedicated to uplifting our thinking and being on a higher vibration than just thinking the material world is it. It's not. The material world is not the most important thing going on here. The things that we can't see, the things that we really can't define, those magical moments of coincidences that are not, they just are meant to be, the vibration, the psychic connection. Those are the true essence of this journey called life that we're sharing. So I wish you a beautiful moment. And if you're having trouble of any sort, just remember that I love you. And there's enough love in my heart for the whole world. Om Namah Shivaya.